St. Peter's Basilica is one of the most iconic buildings in Western culture, but the facade we see today is the culmination of literal millenniums of changes, decisions and work, from a circus complex belonging to the most infamous tyrannical Roman Emperor Nero to a place of holy veneration. The current basilica and square from a book published by Carlos Fontana, the final architect of the basilica, records the total cost of the construction at 46 million ducats, which converted to modern US dollars would be 33 billion. However, since gold today doesn't have the same buying power it used to, some estimates put it closer to 53 billion US dollars. The price tag was so high that the Pope who originally commissioned the book was worried that it would further antagonize the Protestants and ordered it not to be published, with his successor publishing it. It is one of the most awe-inspiring buildings ever constructed, and it would appear even more extremely gargantuan had the massive square in front not been built to offset the enormous size of the basilica facade and make it appear smaller. Even though the first thing one notices in person is the sheer size of the basilica, it masks its size quite well, especially on camera, since it was designed so well and that everything is so proportional. So it is hard to understand how big everything is until you see a person for scale near the basilica. It is easily the largest church ever built, containing 778 columns, 395 statues, 44 altars, and 4,400 lanterns needed to illuminate the exterior before the invention of electric lighting. Covering 227,000 square feet, more than 2 football fields and standing room for 60,000 worshippers, with the piazza in front of the church being able to hold more than 300,000 people. The construction of St. Peter's lasted 120 years, with the decoration of the interior continuing for another 50 years. The dome is 133.3 meters tall, the tallest dome in the world, as well as the tallest building in Rome, dominating the historic skyline, with an unofficial, unwritten rule that no building should be taller than it, in homage to the unprecedented ancient history and culture of the Eternal City. The main nave and facade both have a height of 45 meters. St. Peter's is also the longest basilica in the world, with an outside length of 218 meters and an inside length of 186 meters, with the facade being 115 meters wide. The dome has an inner diameter of 41.5 meters at the base, only beaten by the 2,000-year-old pure Roman concrete dome of the Pantheon at 43.44 meters, also in Rome. However, St. Peter's dome weighs 14,000 tons compared to the Pantheon's 5,000 tons. There were 5 main architects, the original architect being Bramante, replaced by Raphael in 1515, who reduced the tower sizes. He died after only 5 years on the job. They both aspired for a Pantheon-inspired dome. Pope Paul III in 1547 appointed Michelangelo to oversee the design and construction of the basilica. The facade of the building was designed and constructed by Carlo and Stefano Moderno, father and son. Gian Lorenzo Bernini also attempted to design the facade but failed, though he was the principal architect of the main square out front, one of the basilica's most defining features. Here we are walking alongside the stone papal escape route called Passetto di Borgo that runs 800 meters from the Vatican City to the Castel Sant'Angelo. Within its walls is a passageway that several popes have used as an emergency escape route. Its passage, being only 3.5 meters wide, meant that only 2 people could pass at the same time, making it safer for the popes to not be chased. Construction of the wall dates back to 850, with Pope Nicholas III overseeing the creation of its current form in 1277. Pope Alexander II finished the wall in 1492. Here on Google Earth we can see the path the passageway takes from the Vatican to Castel Sant'Angelo. This passage was quite useful throughout history. The most recent papal escape was in 1527, when Clement VII evaded the 20,000 mutinous troops of Charles V, who went on to murder most of the Swiss Guard on the steps of St. Peter's Basilica, with the Pope taking the passageway to take refuge in the old ancient Roman mausoleum. The Passetto was, at first, property of the Vatican City, even though most of it was located in Italian territory. This only changed recently with Pope Giovanni Paolo II, who chose to give it to the Italian government, all but the first 80 meters of the corridor that are located in the Vatican. After some years of maintenance work, the Italian government managed to reopen Passetto di Borgo for the public in 1999. It is now possible to walk through Passetto di Borgo by visiting Castel Sant'Angelo. Here we are outside enjoying the views of the ancient 2,000-year-old Roman mausoleum dedicated to Hadrian, now Castel Sant'Angelo. You can see where the passageway from the Vatican connects to this monument. Here we are back at St. Peter's Square, the open space which lies before the basilica, designed by Gian Lorenzo Bernini under direction of Pope Alexander VII, so that the greatest number of people could see the Pope give his blessing. Bernini had been working on the interior of St. Peter's for decades. Now he gave order to the space with his renowned colonnades, using a simplified Doric order. There were many constraints from existing structures. The masses of the buildings of the Vatican Palace crowded the space to the right of the basilica's facade. The structures needed to be masked without obscuring the papal apartments. The obelisk marked a center, and a granite fountain by Maderno stood to one side. The trapezoidal shape of the piazza, which creates a heightened perspective for a visitor leaving the basilica and has been praised as a masterstroke of Baroque theatre, is largely a product of site constraints. According to the Lateran Treaty, the area of St. Peter's Square is subject to the authority of Italian police for crowd control, even though it is a part of the Vatican State. At the center of the square stands the Vatican Obelisk, an uninscribed Egyptian obelisk of red granite, 26 meters tall. Originally erected in Heliopolis, Egypt, standing in the Temple of the Sun during the reign of Pharaoh Nebkhaur-Amenemhet II, who reigned from 1992-1985 BC. It was moved to the Julian Forum of Alexandria by Emperor Augustus, where it stood until AD 37, when Emperor Caligula ordered the obelisk to be shipped to Rome, placing it on the spina which ran along the center of the Circus of Nero. It was moved to its current site in 1586 by the engineer-architect Domenico Fontana under the direction of Pope Sixtus V. The engineering feat of re-erecting its vast weight was memorialized in a suite of engravings. The Pope appointed a council to consider ways and means of moving the 330-ton Aswan granite obelisk a quarter of a mile to its current position. Nearly 500 men came to submit their plans. The obelisk is of great importance as it was witness to the martyrdoms of past Christians during the age of persecutions in the Circus of Nero. Most importantly, it witnessed the execution of St. Peter, which is why it is so prominently displayed in the square. The honor went to Domenico Fontana, the Pope's official architect, who proved to the council the feasibility of his proposal by making a scale model in lead. Fontana erected a framed tower of timbers surrounding the obelisk, and then by means of ropes attached to the tower, raised the obelisk from its pedestal and afterward lowered it so that it should rest on a wooden platform. This platform he had drawn on rollers to the new site, where the tower was re-erected and the great stone was raised from its horizontal position on the platform to the vertical and set on the new base. The project required 900 men, 75 horses and untold numbers of pulleys and lengths of rope. The operation was carried out using hemp ropes and iron bars, weighing 40,000 pounds, and took about 5 months to complete, captivating the city's populace. In fact, the operation was so delicate, the Pope was said to have threatened anyone who distracted the workers with imprisonment or even capital punishment. The name of Nero conjures up images of savagery and madness. Around 64 AD, Rome burned in a fire that lasted 6 days. When the fire had run its course, nearly 70% of the city lay in ruins. Ancient Roman historians who lived in that era, like Suetonius and Cassius Dio, believed that Nero had been behind it all, hoping to clear the area for a building project he wished to call Necropolis. The displaced citizens also blamed Nero for the fire, so he found a convenient scapegoat in the relatively unknown sect of Christianity. Nero blamed the fire on the refusal of the Christians to worship the Roman gods. Thus began a terrible chapter in history, where people were persecuted for their beliefs and killed for entertainment. It was convenient for Nero to host these executions at the Circus, since most of the victims of the fire had been relocated in that vicinity. He hoped to appease them by avenging their losses with the death of Christians. It was within this setting that the Apostle Peter was martyred. Christians believed that Peter had received the authority to preside over the church from Jesus himself. Tradition holds that Peter asked his executioners to crucify him upside down, saying he was not worthy to die in the same way as his master had. After Peter's death, his friends and followers took his body, placing it in a nearby necropolis. Records show that by the middle of the 2nd century, the Circus of Nero had been abandoned. Many scholars believe that the memory of the atrocities that had taken place there may have contributed to its abandonment. Underneath the current basilica lies the Vatican Necropolis, which conveniently stood near Nero's Circus after it fell into abandonment. It was forbidden to bury the dead within city walls during imperial times, so many cemeteries and burial grounds sprang along the roads outside city limits. In this diagram you can see the present-day St. Peter's Basilica on the top first layer. Beneath it lays the buried floor and remains of old St. Peter's Basilica, and underneath that on the third layer stands the buried yet very well-preserved Vatican Necropolis, which excavations recently started in 1940 and now can be visited by a limited guided tour. The red area, or number 7 on the diagram, represents the trophy of Gaius. One of the differences between a cemetery and a necropolis is that cemeteries are usually for underground burial, while ancient necropolises are almost like dwellings for the dead. Christians venerated the bodies of saints, and particularly the bodies of martyrs. Because Peter was a very important martyr, it makes sense that his followers would have wanted to preserve his body without calling a lot of attention to it due to increased persecution. A very logical and convenient place was the Vatican Necropolis, adjacent to the Circus, where Peter's body would have gone unnoticed with all the others already resting there. As time went on, more and more Christians came to worship at the site of Peter's tomb. Around the year 150 AD, members of the church decided to build a better marker to assist the pilgrims. This monument became known as the Trophy of Gaius. The Trophy of Gaius was intentionally built to resemble a pagan monument, a shrine known during Roman times as edicula. Ediculae were household shrines dedicated to the Lares, the deities protecting the house and family. In the case of the Trophy of Gaius, the structure was large enough to accommodate a platform for a man to climb and preach Mass, while at the same time having a view of the road. The area surrounding the platform was used to perform baptisms. The marker's name references Gaius, who was a Christian living in Rome around the year 200 AD. Gaius was famous for having exchanged letters with a man called Proclus, where he argued the importance of Rome as a center of Christianity. In the year 312 AD, Constantine defeated his rival Maxentius at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. By the end of 324 AD, he emerged as the sole ruler of the Roman Empire. Constantine ascribed his victory to the intervention of the Christian God. Tradition holds that Constantine had received a vision of the Christian sign Chi Rho during one of his campaigns, and heard a voice that told him, "In this sign, conquer." To show his devotion, Constantine began the construction of a church in Rome, the Basilica Constantiniana, now San Giovanni in Laterano. However, when he noticed that believers continued to worship at the site of Peter's tomb, he decided to begin construction of a new building on the very spot where the trophy of Gaius stood. It was to be built on the ruins of Nero's Circus from 326 AD. From 65 AD to 313 AD, Christians in the Roman Empire were forced to practice the beliefs in hiding. For 248 years, Christians risked their lives to follow Jesus Christ. Emperor Constantine in 313 AD stopped the persecution of Christians in the Edict of Milan, which removed penalties for professing Christianity and returned confiscated property. Throughout his rule, Constantine supported the church financially, built basilicas, granted clergy exemption from certain taxes, and promoted Christians to government offices. Construction of the first St. Peter's Basilica was begun on the orders of the Roman Emperor Constantine around 326 AD. Emperor Constantine wanted the apse of his basilica to be placed directly over this supposed tomb of St. Peter. To accomplish this, he covered over the line of tombs of the necropolis and built his basilica along the north side of the ruined Circus. His architects even incorporated some of the Circus's north buildings into the church. Constructed over 40 years, it was over 107 meters long, and with the addition of a transept, it gave the shape of a Latin cross. It could accommodate around 4,000 worshippers and resembled the Basilica of St. Paul's outside the walls in Rome today. Papal coronations were held at the basilica, and in 800 Charlemagne was crowned Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire there. Old St. Peter's Basilica stood for over 1,000 years, but by the 15th century it had fallen into a grave state of disrepair. Discussions on repairing parts of the structure commenced upon the Pope's return from Avignon. Two people involved in this reconstruction were Leon Battista Alberti and Bernardo Rossellino, who improved the apse and partially added a multi-story exterior gallery to the atrium facade, on which construction continued intermittently until the new basilica was begun. Alberti pronounced the basilica a structural abomination, saying, "Have noticed in the Basilica of St. Peter's in Rome a crass feature. An extremely long and high wall has been constructed over a continuous series of openings, with no curves to give it strength and no buttresses to lend it support. The whole stretch of wall has been pierced by too many openings and built too high. As a result, the continual force of the wind has already displaced the wall more than 6 feet, 1.8 meters, from the vertical. I have no doubt that eventually some slight movement will make it collapse." At first, Pope Julius II had every intention of preserving the old building, but his attention soon turned toward tearing it down and building a new structure. Many people of the time were shocked by the proposal, as the building represented papal continuity going back to St. Peter. The original altar was to be preserved in the new structure that housed it. Pope Julius II decided to build a new basilica in 1505. Donato Bramante won the contract with his idea of a central building in the form of a Greek cross. Work started in 1506. The old basilica was gradually demolished and replaced by the new construction. The new basilica was built 1 floor above the old basilica, and the grottos of St. Peter's Basilica are now on the floor of the old basilica. Julius died in 1513, Bramante in 1514. As successor to Bramante, Raffaello Sanzio was appointed together with other architects. Raffaello returned with his plan to the layout of a 3-aisled basilica. After Raffaello's death, Antonio da Sangallo the Younger followed in 1520, together with Balthasar Peruzzi. Antonio's plan shows the church towers that were to be built on the right and left over the porch. However, the work was interrupted again in 1527 due to the looting of Rome by the mutinous, unpaid troops of Charles V. In 1538 it went on under Pope Paul III. But Antonio knew that he would not see the end of the work, and so he built a wooden model of his plans. The model is located under the roof of St. Peter's Basilica and unfortunately cannot be viewed today. After the death of Antonio di San Gallo in 1546, Michelangelo Buonarroti followed, who was already 70 years old at the time. Michelangelo returned to the idea of the central building. In his plans, you can see the reinforced pillars for the dome he designed. Michelangelo died in 1564, and the dome was completed in 1590 by Giacomo della Porta. In 1603, Pope Clement VIII commissioned the architect Carlo Maderno to complete the basilica. The three-nave longhouse was added to Michelangelo's central building. This corresponded to the floor plan of the old basilica and the shape of the Latin cross. Maderno also built the porch and facade. The new basilica was consecrated by Pope Urban VIII on November 18, 1626. However, construction was interrupted in 1622. The extension for the steeples made the facade wider. Bernini started to continue building the steeples. However, there were serious problems with the foundations and the steeples had to be demolished again. The bell house is therefore under the clock on the left side of the facade. There are 6 bells in it. The oldest is the Campana della Rota from 1280 with a weight of 1,735 kilograms. The facade of St. Peter's Basilica was built by Carlo Maderno. He was also responsible for the construction of the long nave and the porch, which were attached to the central building designed by Michelangelo. In order to not cover Michelangelo's dome, the facade had to remain as low as possible. The columns of the facade are laid out in a colossal order, which means that the columns go over several floors. There are 5 passages to the portico with bronze grills on the lower floor. On the upper floor, there is the Hall of Blessings, Aula del Benedizione, with 5 balconies. The middle balcony is the Lodge of Blessings, from which the Pope gives the Urbi et Orbi blessing. The newly elected Pope is also announced on the balcony. Jesus, John the Baptist and the 11 apostles are enthroned above the facade. Peter is missing because the basilica is dedicated to him. His statue is also on the left in the forecourt. The statues are around 5.7 meters or 18 feet and 7 inches tall.
The sun's gonna be like this on the walk back. I'm gonna shut the cap. I cannot see. I literally cannot see.
Yeah, sunglasses.
I forgot to bring them. Look at the size of these pillars though.
As soon as you enter St. Peter's Basilica, you can immediately perceive how huge the building is. The altar above Peter's grave is far away. It is 90 meters to the first pillars that support the dome. This is almost half of the total length of the basilica of 186.36 meters. The main nave is 26 meters wide, 45 meters high, and has an area of around 4,500 meters square. The interior of the basilica is dimensioned accordingly. The little angel statues who hold the basins of holy water are almost 2 meters high. The figures of the founders of the orders in the niches are 4.5 meters high in the lower row and 5.5 meters in the upper row. There are 3 chapels in each of the aisles. The chapel with Michelangelo's Pieta is just to the right of the entrance. Almost every flat artwork in the basilica is made from mosaics, which is why flash photography is allowed. Even the large artworks on the wall, which appear to be painted at first glance, are actually extremely detailed mosaics. This ancient statue of St. Peter, portrayed as he gives a blessing and preaches while holding the keys to the kingdom of heaven, is famous throughout the world. Some scholars have attributed it to Arnolfo di Cambio, 1245 to 1302, but others believe that it is a 5th century casting. Pilgrims who come to the basilica traditionally touch and kiss its foot, so that it is literally worn thin. In the Middle Ages, pilgrims who reached Rome touched and kissed the foot of the statue and prayed to St. Peter, asking that he be merciful and open the gates of heaven for them if they died during the pilgrimage. On the 29th of June, the feast of St. Peter, the statue is clothed with an white linen, white vest reaching to the feet, tiara, a long scarf, a red cloak and a ring so that it practically seems to come to life. Fine marble, Sicilian jasper, green porphyry, and the marble of St. Peter decorate the pedestal. Behind it, there is what seems to be a fine brocade draping. However, it is actually a mosaic. Above the baldachin, in a circular mosaic, is a portrait of Pope Pius IX, 1847 to 1878, the first pope who in 19 centuries reigned longer than St. Peter himself, who had led the church for 25 years. Pius IX sat on Peter's throne for 31. Bernini's first work at St. Peter's was to design the baldacchino, a pavilion-like structure 95 feet tall and claimed to be the largest piece of bronze in the world, which stands beneath the dome and above the altar, marking the tomb of St. Peter. Their twisted barley sugar shape had a special significance, as they were modeled on those of the Temple of Jerusalem and donated by the Emperor Constantine. Based on these columns, Bernini created 4 huge columns of bronze, twisted and decorated with laurel leaves and bees, which were the emblem of Pope Urban. To create this, Pope Urban VIII took all the bronze that adorned the top of the porch of the ancient Roman Pantheon temple for Bernini to melt down and repurpose in the making of this structure.
You know those soul churches that they have?
They're like an offshoot of Protestantism. I think they would be absolutely.
On the left is one of the few paintings in the basilica, as everything else are mosaics. It is Our Lady of Perpetual Help painted on wood, made in the 12th century, embellished with the rarest alabaster, amethysts and other semi-precious stones, and 4 superb columns of African marble and green porphyry created by Girolamo Muziano, 1528 to 1592. The remains of St. Gregory of Nazianzus, who died in the year 390, one of the great theologians from Cappadocia, are preserved in a porphyry urn beneath the altar.
Yesterday, that guy finally gets in. Okay.
Now, we are walking to the chapel and altar of St. Sebastian, a Roman Praetorian guard who was martyred under Emperor Diocletian in the year 288. Under the altar are the remains of Pope St. John Paul II.
Alright. Done? Oh yeah.
If you want to see what?
So yeah. Just to make it continue for a time, I feel, I think. Oh, it's a tour. Yep.
The Altar of Transfiguration is one of the most beautiful mosaics in St. Peter's. A team of 6 artists took 9 years to execute the mosaic, finishing in 1767. It is a reproduction of the last painting by the Italian High Renaissance master Raphael, which is now in the Vatican museums. Raphael worked on the 4.1 meter by 2.8 meter painting from 1516 until his death in 1520. Beneath the altar are the remains of Blessed Pope Innocent XI, his face and hands covered with silver. The traditional Latin Mass is said here most mornings at 7.
That's crunch. I guess because it's treasury. I mean, that also means gold.
The left transept of the basilica is used for daily mass and has 3 altars. On the left is the altar of the crucifixion of St. Peter. The altar is very close to the actual site where St. Peter was crucified upside down. In the middle is the altar of St. Joseph. On the right is the altar of St. Thomas. Again, all 3 are mosaics, as are the majority of artwork in the basilica, which means flash photography is allowed.
Basically like multiple sections.
On the immediate left is Bernini's last great masterpiece, a monument to Pope Alexander VII in 1678.
Services.
Oh, you got like a how everyone with their amps.
And their rock guitars.
The altar of Our Lady of the Column is an image of the Blessed Now we are looking at another masterpiece by Bernini, finished in 1611 at the end of the central nave. Encased in an ornate gilded bronze chair designed by Bernini is a relic, a wooden throne that tradition claims belonged to the Apostle St. Peter, the first pope, which he used as Bishop of Rome. Chair, or cathedra in Latin, or throne of a bishop, represents his authority as the shepherd of his flock and his teaching authority. It is from this word that we get the word cathedral, which is the mother church of a diocese, where the diocesan bishop celebrates Mass and where there is a special chair for him. It is prominently displayed in the center of the apse of the basilica, behind the main altar and beneath the round illuminated window depicting the Holy Spirit in the form of a dove. The light streaming through the window illuminates the sun rays and sculpted clouds around it. The relic itself is described as an oaken chair damaged by cuts and worms. The back and front of the chair are trimmed with carved ivory. This description is from 1867, when the relic was photographed and displayed for veneration for the last time. During the Middle Ages, the chair was exhibited each year for the veneration of the faithful, and the newly elected pope was solemnly carried into the basilica and enthroned on it. Pope Alexander VII had the ivory-covered chair put into the gigantic bronze cathedra with the statues of the doctors of the Church, St. Ambrose and St. Augustine of the Roman Church, and St. Athanasius and St. John Chrysostom of the Greek Church. The religious significance is extremely clear. The doctors of the Church were always consistent with Peter's teachings as they expounded theological doctrine. The Gospel does not change because the Holy Spirit, portrayed as a dove, flies along the span of the centuries, assisting and accompanying its church. The chair, or cathedra of Peter, symbolizes the perpetual continuity of the doctrine and its promise of infallibility. It triumphed over all heresies throughout the centuries. The fine alabaster window, surrounded by golden clouds and angels flying between rays of light, casts a mystical warmth through the basilica, especially in the afternoon. It is divided into 12 sections, in homage to the 12 apostles who carried the words of the gospel throughout the world. Here we are directly under Michelangelo's dome, where we can see the beautiful mosaics up close. To get to this level, there are 231 stairs or an elevator. From here, there is another 320 stairs to get to the very top, with no elevator, but a narrow single-file staircase that slowly spirals up, with the roof slanting in as you go. At the very end, it gets narrower and narrower until there is an extremely narrow corkscrew staircase. After the claustrophobic, strenuous climb, one is met with a view of Rome from the highest point in Rome, from the tallest dome in the world.
Mi farò. La discesa sarà diversa, non sarà la stessa della caduta. Anche perché non abbiamo portato nessuno che scendeva. Abbiamo fatto la foto di là. Voglio vedere la foto.
St. Paul, outside the walls, is one of the 4 major papal basilicas in Rome and the burial place of the Apostle Paul after his martyrdom in Rome. Since 2005, the basilica enjoys extraterritoriality and is managed by the Vatican through an archpriest. The archaeological area is part of the basilica's complex and lies immediately beside the church, containing ancient Roman remains and fragments of columns and column capitals. The site also offers an insight on life in the Middle Ages. Extremely large and imposing when passing from the outside, when arriving at the front, one is met with the facade with golden mosaics gleaming in the sun, representing the 4 prophets Jeremiah, Isaiah, Ezekiel and Daniel, and 12 lambs representing the apostles drinking from 4 rivers, that is, the Gospels. In fact, in the 5th century, the basilica was larger than the old St. Peter's Basilica, commissioned by Constantine in 326 AD and finished in 360 AD. With a similar Romanesque interior architectural, one can imagine the colourful splendour of old St. Peter's, which was demolished after being declared a structural abomination by Leon Battista Alberti, one of 2 people consulted by Pope Julius II on the matter of repairing or reconstructing the old church that by the 15th century had fallen into ruin, with the other consultant being Bernardo Rossellino. The facade is framed by a large courtyard referred to as a quadriportico with tall and imposing Corinthian columns. In the middle sits the statue of St. Paul. To the front and to the side of the papal altar is the Easter candle, which is 6 meters tall, decorated with carvings, telling stories from the Gospels in Romanesque style. In the center sits the papal altar, which is only reserved for use by the Pope and selected celebrants during celebrations and special occasions. Above this stands Arnolfo di Cambio's Gothic baldaquin, a ceremonial canopy over an altar, one of the most exquisite examples of Gothic style in Rome. Pope Innocent III, whose papacy was from 1198 to 1216, ordered the creation of the large mosaic in the apse. The mosaics of the apse were greatly damaged in a fire in 1823, and only a few traces of the original are incorporated in the restoration. Traditionally, St. Paul's body was buried around 2 miles from where he was martyred. The burial site was near the Ostiense Way and owned by a Christian woman named Lucina. A monument called a tropaeum was built there and became a respected place. Later, Constantine I constructed a basilica on the site of the tropaeum. The basilica was expanded significantly by Theodosius I in 386, now known as St. Paul, outside the walls. In the 4th century, most of Paul's remains were moved to a sarcophagus, except for his head, which is believed to rest at the Lateran. His tomb lies beneath a marble tombstone in the basilica's crypt, located 1.37 meters below the altar. The tombstone has a Latin inscription, Paulo Apostolo Mart, meaning to Paul the Apostle and Martyr. The chain that, according to the most ancient tradition, attached the Apostle Paul to the Roman soldier assigned to guard him while in prison in Rome, is the most precious among the relics and objects on display. Already in the 5th century, Pope Leo the Great made mention of it. The basilica itself was founded by the Roman Emperor Constantine I over the burial place of Paul of Tarsus, where it was said that after the apostle's execution, his followers erected a memorial. This first basilica was consecrated by Pope Sylvester in 324. In 386, Emperor Theodosius I began erecting a much larger and more beautiful basilica with a nave and 4 aisles with a transept. It was consecrated around 402 by Pope Innocent I. The work, including the mosaics, was not completed until Leo I's pontificate, which was from 440 to 461. On the 15th of July 1823, a workman repairing the copper gutters of the roof started a fire that devastated the interior of the basilica and caused the roof to collapse. This basilica, among all the churches of Rome, had preserved much of its original character for 1453 years prior to this fire. In 1825, Leo XII issued a papal letter sent to all bishops of the Roman Catholic Church encouraging donations for the reconstruction. A few months later, he issued orders that the basilica be rebuilt exactly as it had been when new in the 4th century, also stipulating that precious elements from later periods, such as the medieval mosaics and tabernacle, also be repaired and retained, which later turned out to be unrealistic and soon ceased to be enforced, the result being that the rebuilt portions, though very similar to the original late classical design, is by no means identical. The nave's 80 columns and its wood and adorned golden ceiling, crafted with stucco, hail from the 19th century. The remains of the ancient basilica encompass solely the inner part of the apse, containing the triumphal arch. The mosaics of the triumphal arch from the 5th century are authentic, but also extensively restored. An engraving in the lower segment confirms they were executed during the era of Leo I, funded by Galla Placidia. The theme illustrates John's apocalypse, with the head of Christ at the center, flanked by the 24 church scholars, crowned by the flying symbols of the 4 gospel writers. St. Peter and St. Paul are depicted on the right and left of the arch, the latter gesturing downwards, likely towards his tomb. In the old basilica, each pope had his portrait in a painted frieze extending above the columns separating the aisles from the nave. A 19th century mosaic version can be seen now. The nave's interior walls were also redecorated with painted scenes from St. Paul's life placed between the windows of the clerestory, the high sections of wall containing windows above the eye level. The Lateran Palace is located on St. John's Square on the Caelian Hill, adjacent to the Arch-basilica of St. John Lateran. Its name derives from the wealthy Laterani family who held the palace estate. Members of the Plautii Laterani family served as magistrates and administrators for several emperors. Their ancestor, Lucius Sextius Lateranus, is said to have been the first commoner to hold the post of consul in 366 BC. A member of the Laterani family, consul-appointed Plautius Lateranus, became well known after being accused by Nero of conspiring against the emperor. The charges resulted in his property being confiscated and redistributed. The palace estate known as the Domus Laterani came into possession of Emperor Constantine I after marrying his second wife Fausta, the sister of Maxentius, the emperor whom he defeated in the most pivotal Western world history, changing event known as the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, where he defeated Maxentius under the banner of Christianity against the forces of Maxentius under the banner of Roman polytheism. Around 312 AD, Constantine commissioned the construction of the Basilica di San Giovanni in Laterano on the site, which was later given to the Bishop of Rome by Constantine. The palace slowly became known more as an imperial residence for the papacy as the Eastern Roman Empire, today commonly referred to as Byzantium, grew less able to relieve the papacy in the west from Lombard incursions. As a result, the papacy grew more independent, and the palace complex was used not only from where the Pope could exercise spiritual, but also temporal authority, that is, governing worldly and secular affairs, to bolster its security from the 8th century onwards. It is from this period that extensive renovations and restructuring were completed by subsequent popes throughout the centuries, as well as adding new buildings and towers. Across the road from the palace piazza on the Via Domenico Fontana stands remaining arches of the Aqua Claudia aqueduct begun by Emperor Caligula in 38 AD and finished by Emperor Claudius in 52 AD. Though splendorous in its design, the current palace complex is not entirely authentic, as two destructive fires in 1307 and 1361 did irreparable harm. The deterioration of the palace also coincided with the departure of popes from Rome during the Avignon papacy, where for 67 years, 7 successive French popes resided in Avignon. At the time it was within the Kingdom of Arles, part of the Holy Roman Empire, now part of France. This was a result of disputed between the papacy and the Holy Roman Emperor over which of them was the leader of Christendom in temporal secular matters. Upon the papacy returning to Rome, they could not stay in the Lateran, still in a state of devastation from the fires, so they resided at the Basilica di Santa Maria in Trastevere, then at the Basilica di Santa Maria Maggiore, and finally permanently at their residence at the Vatican. Pope Sixtus V, more concerned with rationalized urban planning than the preservation of antiquities, destroyed much of the remaining ancient palace, only preserving the chapel of the Sancta Sanctorum and the Scala Santa, and commissioned his favorite architect, Domenico Fontana, to design the reconstruction of the palace to the one we see today. Directly next to the Lateran Palace complex, at the crossroads between Via Dii Laterani and Via Amba Aradam, the remains of a nymphaeum were discovered, consisting of a rectangular room topped by an apse, with 2 smaller rooms connected to the side. The remains from the Julius Claudian age were once connected to baths, whose central environment is still preserved to the southwest of the Lateran Baptistery, datable to the first half of the 3rd century AD. Here we see an engraving of the Lateran Palace during medieval times prior to the 2 disastrous fires. Here we are inside the domed octagonal Lateran Baptistery, joined with the Arch-basilica of St. John Lateran and the Lateran Palace later in construction. Founded by Pope Sixtus III in 440 AD on an earlier structure where we can partially see the mosaic floor and remaining columns. These are the remains of a villa from the 1st century AD have been discovered, later replaced by a thermal building dating from between the age of Hadrian and that of Antoninus Pius. It was then rebuilt under Septimius Severus and Caracalla. Legend has it that Constantine the Great was baptized here. However, it is more likely that he was baptized in the eastern part of the Roman Empire by an Arian bishop. The baptistery was the only baptistery in Rome for many generations. The style of the large octagonal basin design was copied throughout Italy as it allowed for a full immersion. Flanked around the side by 8 porphyry columns with marble Corinthian capitals, the walls and ceilings depict scenes from the life of Constantine, completed during the pontificate of Pope Urban VII and the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, in which Constantine defeated the pagan emperor Maxentius. On the piazza is the largest standing ancient Egyptian obelisk in the world, the Lateran Obelisk, originally weighing 413 tons. First constructed around 1400 BC in Karnak, Egypt, during the reigns of pharaohs Thutmose III and Thutmose IV. Roman Emperor Constantius II then had it moved to Alexandria, where it resided for a few decades before having it shipped to Rome in 357 AD. It was installed in the Circus Maximus, decorating the spina, the spine or middle section of the racecourse, standing next to another Egyptian obelisk called the Flaminio, which was installed by Augustus and had been standing there since 10 BC. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century, the Circus Maximus fell into disuse and was abandoned, and the obelisks eventually broke or were taken down, where they were eventually buried by mud and debris carried by a small nearby stream through the elapse of time. Both were eventually rediscovered in the 14th and 15th centuries through serious excavations by Pope Sixtus V and were restored. The Lateran Obelisk was re-erected at the current spot, replacing where the equestrian statue of Marcus Aurelius once stood, which was relocated to decorate the Capitoline Hill. The Flaminio Obelisk was relocated to the current Piazza del Popolo. The Lateran Obelisk remains the last ancient Egyptian obelisk to be erected in Rome in 1588. To the right of the facade of the Arch-basilica of St. John Lateran stands a replica of the Byzantine mosaics that used to be the apse of the Leonian triclinium, one of the main halls of the ancient Lateran Palace built by Pope Leo III around 800 AD to serve as the heart of papal ceremonial meetings and banquets. The Arch-basilica Cathedral of the Most Holy Saviour and of Saints John the Baptist and John the Evangelist in the Lateran, also known as the Papal Arch-basilica of St. John in Lateran, holds a place of unparalleled significance within the heart of Rome. It is the Catholic cathedral church of the Diocese of Rome and serves as the seat of the Bishop of Rome, being the Pope. Situated just beyond the confines of Vatican City, approximately 4 kilometers to the northwest, this sacred complex, including the Arch-basilica and its accompanying structures, exists as sanctified ground under the jurisdiction and as property of the Holy See, as enshrined by the Lateran Treaty of 1929. The roots of the name Laterano trace back to an illustrious ancient Roman lineage, mentioned previously being the Laterani, a family of magistrates whose grand palace, known as the Lateran Palace, once graced this very location, later confiscated by Emperor Nero. This palace, once the primary abode of the Pope, held historical significance until the Middle Ages. Dating back to the year 324, the Arch-basilica stands as the oldest and most esteemed among the 4 major papal basilicas. Moreover, it enjoys the distinguished title of Arch-basilica, a testament to its preeminence. It proudly claims the status of being the oldest public church in the storied annals of Rome, as well as the Western world's oldest basilica. Within its hallowed walls resides the cathedra, the bishop's seat, signifying its spiritual authority. Furthermore, this venerable institution bears the esteemed distinction of being the ecumenical mother church for Catholic faithful. Enduring trials and tribulations through the ages, the Arch-basilica weathered the ravages of time and survived 2 destructive fires during the 14th century. Rising from the ashes, a new chapter unfolded in the late 16th century under the guidance of Pope Sixtus V, as the basilica was meticulously reconstructed. Subsequent centuries witnessed renovations that graced its interior and culminated in the completion of its resplendent facade in 1735, during the papacy of Clement XIV. Adorning its facade, a profound Latin inscription bears witness to its dedication, reading, Clemens XIV pont max anno, 5th Christo Salvatori, in hon SS Ioan Bapt et Evang. Translated, this inscription affirms, Pope Clement XIV, in the 5th year of his pontificate, dedicated this building to Christ the Saviour in honor of Saints John the Baptist and John the Evangelist. Notably, this inscription underscores the original dedication to Christ the Saviour, with subsequent homage paid to Saint John the Baptist and Saint John the Evangelist. The feast day that shines resplendently upon its calendar is the 6th of August, commemorating the Transfiguration of Christ. In the hierarchy of Catholic churches, the Arch-basilica Cathedral of the Most Holy Saviour and of Saints John the Baptist and John the Evangelist in the Lateran reigns supreme, holding sway over all other churches, including the renowned St. Peter's Basilica. This venerable institution stands as a beacon of faith, history and devotion, etching an indelible mark upon the spiritual tapestry of humanity. Opposite the Lateran Palace is an edifice, a large imposing building which is also extraterritorial property of the Holy See in Rome, formerly known as the Pontifical Sanctuary of the Holy Stairs, and incorporates part of the old Papal Lateran Palace. According to Roman Catholic tradition, the Holy Stairs were the steps leading up to the Praetorium, the tent of a general within a Roman encampment, of Pontius Pilate in Jerusalem, on which Jesus Christ stepped on his way to trial during his passion. The Church claims the mother of Emperor Constantine the Great brought the Holy Stairs from Jerusalem to Rome in 326 AD. Before the reconstruction of the old Lateran Palace, the building was connected to the palace via a corridor. In 1589, Pope Sixtus V had the Papal Lateran Palace, then in ruins from the two fires, to be demolished and reconstructed. He ordered the Holy Stairs to be relocated to the present position before the Sancta Sanctorum, or the Holy of Holies, named for the many precious relics preserved there. The holy steps themselves, as well as the marble replica stairs alongside it, led up to the Sancta Sanctorum, which was the personal chapel of the early popes. The holy stairs may only be ascended on knees by pilgrims and the faithful. In 1724, Pope Benedict XIII covered the original marble stairs in wood for their protection, as the marble had been significantly worn by pilgrims ascending the stairs over time. In 2019, following restoration works, the marble stairs were exposed for the first time in almost 300 years, and from April 2019 and July 2019, they were open to the public, causing visitor numbers to increase threefold, with long lines forming at the entrance. Now we are walking along one of the most complex and well-preserved sections of the 2,000-year-old Aurelian city walls of Rome. Running parallel to the Viale Carlo Felice, this road connects the Basilica di Santa Croce, or known in English as the Basilica of the Holy Cross in Jerusalem, to the Basilica di San Giovanni in Laterano. The area separating the two pilgrimage churches is now a public green space, offering opportunities to walk and relaxation with numerous benches and flower beds, all the while being able to view the spectacular ancient Aurelian Walls which runs along one side of the garden and park. Here we see one side of the less preserved ancient amphitheater of Castrense, built during the first decades of the 3rd century AD. Both this amphitheater and the Circus Varianus behind the basilica were once part of the same palatial villa for the Roman emperors. The open arches of the outer walls were eventually walled up when incorporated into the Aurelian Walls from 271 to 275 AD. At this time period, the purpose switched from entertainment to being used as a fortification. The remains of the second story in the 16th century were demolished for defensive requirements. Here on Google Earth, we can see the current remains of the amphitheater and the Circus Varianus, as well as how it was incorporated into the Aurelian Walls under Aurelian during the crisis of the 3rd century, in which Rome nearly disintegrated under the pressure of internal revolts and barbarian invasions. Archaeological studies have revealed a hypogeum under the arena with bones of large animals, indicating that this arena was used for spectacles of animal hunts. We can also see in which the current park and garden running parallel to the ancient Aurelian walls leads to the Arch-basilica of St. John in Lateran, as demonstrated in the next photo, where we can also see the interior of what remains of the ancient amphitheater. The next image shows what the amphitheater as it was after the outer arches were walled up and it was incorporated into the Aurelian walls. This photo shows the outer walled-up section today, with the next image showing the condition of the same area in the 1575, with the Basilica of the Holy Cross in the background. As per the Christian tradition, this basilica was consecrated circa 325 AD to house the relics of the Passion of Jesus Christ brought to Rome, Empress Helena, mother of Roman Emperor Constantine I. The basilica's floor was covered with soil from Jerusalem, thus acquiring the title In Jerusalem. It is not dedicated to the Holy Cross of Jerusalem, but the basilica was considered in a sense to be in Jerusalem, much in the way that an embassy today is considered extraterritorial. Built on the foundations of the previously mentioned imperial villa, which was begun by Emperor Septimius Severus and finished by Emperor Elagabalus, it was consecrated in 325 AD. At the beginning of the 4th century, the palace was chosen as a residence by the Empress Helena, mother of Constantine, called Palazzo Caesoriano, which comes from the Latin sedeo, since in the late imperial era the imperial council used to meet in a hall of the palace. It was on her initiative that the large rectangular hall was transformed into a Christian basilica around 320, originally covered by a flat ceiling illuminated by 20 windows placed 5 on each side and with valuable marble decoration in the lower register. Helena had some soil from Calvary dispersed. Walking down to the vault, there is a mosaic designed by Melozzo da Forli, created sometime before 1485 and depicting Jesus' blessing, histories of the cross and various saints. The altar has a large statue of Saint Helena, which was created by adapting an ancient statue of the Roman goddess Juno discovered at Ostia. The Basilica of Santa Croce was declared a titular church, meaning holding a formal title without any real authority, by Pope Gregory III in 523. Despite the fact it was located on the outskirts of Rome, it became a destination of regular pilgrimage, thanks to the popularity of the relics it kept. In the 8th century, the basilica was restored by Pope Gregory II. After the basilica fell into neglect, Pope Lucius II restored it in the 12th century, giving it a Romanesque appearance with a nave, 2 aisles, belfry and porch. Several famous relics of disputed authenticity are housed in the Cappella del Reliqui, built in 1930 by architect Florestano di Fausto, including part of the elogium or titulus crucis, that is, the panel which was hung on Christ's cross, 2 thorns of the crown of thorns, part of a nail, the index finger of St. Thomas, and 3 small wooden pieces of the true cross. A much larger piece of the true cross was taken from the basilica on the instructions of Pope Urban VIII in 1629 to St. Peter's Basilica, where it is kept near the colossal statue of St. Empress Helena, sculpted by Andrea Bolgi in 1639. In a room adjacent to this area is a replica of the Shroud of Turin, the cloth that Christ was wrapped in the 3 days he spent laying in his tomb before his resurrection. St. Sebastian beyond the walls was included in the list of the 7 classic pilgrimage Catholic churches until the year 2000 Anno Domini, when it was replaced by the shrine of Our Lady of Divine Love. Many pilgrims still favour the traditional list, as St. Sebastian is closer to the city centre, and it contains a labyrinth of ancient catacombs containing the remains of past saints and Christians. The church stands on a site that was already well established within the early Christian community in the 3rd century AD as a large underground burial area, the catacombs. During a time of intense persecution, the site had the important task of safekeeping the relics of St. Peter and Paul, later transferred to the basilicas carrying their name. The Emperor Constantine, the first Christian emperor, built a large basilica on this spot, dedicated to the memory of the apostles, called the Basilica Apostolorum. Some of the remains of the ancient basilica are on display in the interior of the church. The basilica's facade was completely reconstructed in the 17th century, designed by Giovanni Vesanzio, and it features some granite columns once belonging to the former Constantinian basilica. The frontage of the basilica underwent a complete reconstruction during the 1600s under the creative direction of Giovanni Vesanzio. It showcases a collection of granite columns, formerly part of the ancient Constantinian basilica. Inside, the space features a solitary central aisle crowned with an intricately carved wooden roof. This aisle concludes with a triumphant archway. Positioned on the right side is the Chamber of Artifacts, safeguarding a stone that bears purported footprints of Jesus and a spearhead that once struck St. Sebastian. Additionally, a fragment of the column to which he was bound during his martyrdom is also on display. Notably, the renowned Salvator Mundi is an enthralling work of art, a marble bust portraying Jesus the Redeemer. It stands as the final masterpiece realized by the esteemed Gian Lorenzo Bernini. Recovered recently in the year 2001 from the adjacent monastery to the church, The sculpture was meticulously crafted when the maestro of the Baroque era was already 80 years old. It was left as a legacy to his confidant and benefactor, Queen Christine of Sweden. The narrative of Saint Sebastian unfolds during the 3rd century AD. He held the position of captain within the Praetorian Guard, responsible for safeguarding the emperor's life during the rule of Diocletian. The Praetorians were expected to display utmost loyalty and trustworthiness towards the emperor. Sebastian's faith lay within Christianity, potentially from his earliest days. Diocletian, notorious for his vigorous persecution of the emergent monotheistic faith that challenged imperial authority, was apparently unaware of Sebastian's affiliation. Having risen through the ranks, Sebastian discreetly provided aid to incarcerated Christians, his influence extending to the conversion of several court members. Upon the exposure of his covert activities, Diocletian subjected Sebastian to torture and execution by arrows. Astonishingly, Sebastian survived this ordeal, though he was left for dead. Having regained his strength, he confronted Diocletian within the imperial palace, condemning the emperor's harsh treatment of Christians. In response, Diocletian ordered Sebastian's demise through a fatal flogging. Despite his body being discarded into the city's sewers, known as the Cloaca Maxima, it was later clandestinely retrieved by the Christian community under the cover of night and interred within the catacombs. Throughout the ages, reverence for Sebastian has endured, beginning from the 3rd century. Even during the Middle Ages, when other catacombs fell into disuse, pilgrims continued to journey to this site to pay homage to the saint's memory. His remains are now enshrined within an urn beneath the central altar. Widely acknowledged as the 3rd patron saint of Rome, following Saints Peter and Paul, Sebastian's legacy lives on. The underground catacombs of San Sebastian are among the world's first subterranean cemeteries. The martyred remains of San Sebastian were buried at the site in 350, and a basilica was erected over the grounds to honor the saint in the early 4th century. At the time, the subterranean burial area became known as ad catacumbas, which means near the hollows, due to the excavated quarries that existed at the site. This was the first use of term catacombs, and it has since signified underground Christian burials chambers. The complex was also known as Memoria Apostolorum, because the apostles Saints Peter and Paul were venerated there. Starting from the 1st century AD, the site was used and built up intensely. The galleries for extracting pozzolana, a volcanic ash used for mortar and cement, were utilized again in order to put both pagan and Christian tombs there in the form of loculi, meaning separate cavities, several rooms for storing funeral urns, and at least 2 residential buildings were built, the big villa and the small villa, with notable pictorial wall decorations. Around the middle of the 2nd century, the area of the quarries was covered over in order to erect 3 mausoleums above it in which Christians were buried in the first half of the 3rd century. After the area was covered over again, it created the surface on which to make the trichlea. A pergola, a framed structure surrounded by a wall, on which hundreds of graffiti have been deciphered with invocations to Peter and Paul, who were venerated here around the year 250, since it was impossible to go to their tombs in the Vatican and on the Ostiense. On this spot, Emperor Constantine, 306-337, later had a grandiose basilica built. Starting from the 3rd century, the catacombs had already developed underground, which housed the tomb of the martyr Sebastian. Throughout the Middle Ages, the complex continued to be lively and visited. In 1609, Cardinal Scipione Borghese had the current Baroque Basilica of Saint Sebastian commissioned, which is located in the central nave of the Constantine building. The Basilica of St. Lawrence outside the walls holds the tomb of St. Lawrence, martyred in 258 AD during the persecutions of Emperor Valeriano. Before the present-day basilica was constructed, the former estate upon which it sits was once home to a small oratory built by Emperor Constantine I. The emperor built it over the site on which tradition held that St. Lawrence was buried in 258. The church was restored or rebuilt by Pope Damasus I, who had served there as a deacon. In the 580s, Pope Pelagius II commissioned the construction of a church over the site in honor of Lawrence. In the 13th century, Pope Honorius III commissioned the construction of another church in front of the older one. Part of the nave and triumphal arch of Honorius's church were incorporated, although not perfectly aligned. The walls were adorned with intricate frescoes depicting significant moments from the lives of Lawrence and Stephen, the initial deacon to be martyred. Stephen rests alongside Lawrence in the crypt beneath the grand altar. Further excavations unveiled additional crypts below the present street level hosting diverse individuals. The resting place of Pope Hilarius is also located here. Lawrence's path crossed with the future Pope Sixtus II, a renowned teacher originating from Greece, as they embarked on a journey from Spain to Rome. Upon Sixtus ascending to the papacy in 257, he ordained Lawrence, a mere 22 years old, as a deacon. Subsequently, he appointed Lawrence as the Archdeacon of Rome, leading the cohort of 7 deacons serving in the cathedral. This esteemed role encompassed the stewardship of the church's treasures, the administration of its wealth, and the distribution of alms to the impoverished. St. Cyprian, Bishop of Carthage, highlighted that during this period, the customary fate of denounced Christians was execution, with their possessions seized by the imperial treasury. In the early days of August 258, Emperor Valerian issued a decree mandating the immediate execution of all bishops, priests and deacons. Pope Sixtus II fell victim to this edict on August 6, 258, while presiding over a liturgy at the St. Calixtus Cemetery. Following Sixtus's demise, the Roman prefect demanded that Lawrence surrender the church's riches. St. Ambrose recounted that Lawrence requested 3 days to gather the wealth. Swiftly, he channeled the church's assets toward the destitute, aiming to prevent their confiscation by the prefect. On the 3rd day, accompanied by a small delegation, Lawrence presented himself before the prefect. When instructed to hand over the church's treasures, he revealed the city's afflicted, those who were impoverished, infirm, blind and suffering, asserting that these individuals represented the true treasures of the church. Behold the treasures of the church. You see, the church is truly rich, far richer than your emperor. In his role as a deacon in Rome, Lawrence bore the responsibility of managing the church's material possessions and dispensing alms to the needy. Ambrose of Milan narrated that when the prefect of Rome demanded the church's treasures from Lawrence, he presented the poor to whom he had allocated the treasure as charitable aid. Look at these impoverished souls, the treasures I vowed to reveal. Alongside them are pearls and precious gems, widows and consecrated virgins, who are the church's crown. Enraged, the prefect arranged a substantial gridiron with scorching coals beneath it and placed Lawrence upon it, which later led to Lawrence's connection with the gridiron. According to the legend, even after enduring excruciating pain for an extended period, Lawrence maintained his spirit and humor, declaring, "I'm well done on this side. Turn me over." This episode led to St. Lawrence's patronage of cooks, chefs and comedians. In 1943, the area was bombed, and a number of mosaics in the portico and frescoes on the facade were irreparably damaged. The restoration after the war restored the basilica to its medieval architecture. Santa Maria Maggiore, or the Basilica of St. Mary Major, is a major papal basilica and the largest Catholic Marian church in Rome. The church is the territory of the Holy See under the jurisdiction of the Vatican State, operating somewhat like a foreign embassy in Italy. In the category of major basilicas, there are only 4 churches in the world, all of which are in Rome and have a special holy door, usually sealed with cement from the inside and only opened by the Pope during Jubilee years. A major basilica holds a preeminent status within the Roman Catholic ecclesiastical hierarchy, denoting a distinctive class of churches endowed with profound historical, liturgical and spiritual significance. This elevated designation transcends mere architectural form to encapsulate a profound theological and hierarchical import within the Catholic tradition. Central to the concept of a major basilica is its association with the authority of the Pope. By conferring this distinction, the Pope affirms a particular church's vital role in the spiritual life of the Catholic Church. This formal designation serves to emphasize both the spiritual grandeur and liturgical prominence of the basilica, reinforcing its significance as a sacred space. The liturgical role of a major basilica is paramount. It stands as a venerated site for pivotal liturgical events, including significant papal ceremonies and the commemoration of prominent feast days. This liturgical centrality underscores the basilica's capacity to serve as a conduit between the earthly and the divine, further enhancing its symbolic and religious value. Santa Maria Maggiore's designation as a major basilica emerges from a complex interplay of historical developments and theological considerations. Rooted in the 4th century, Santa Maria Maggiore's genesis within the period of early Christianity is a pivotal cornerstone. The basilica's origin story, attributed to a miraculous snowfall on the Esquiline Hill, symbolizes a manifestation of celestial affirmation. While this meteorological occurrence fosters a deep resonance with Marian devotion, it simultaneously underscores the intricacies of interpreting divine intervention in the course of human events. This historical narrative intertwines faith, meteorology, and interpretation, raising questions about the intricate relationship between supernatural events and their human reception. Furthermore, the practice of the papal benediction of the Urbi et Orbi, meaning to the city of Rome and to the world, is a special apostolic blessing given by the Pope every year on Easter Sunday, Christmas, and other special occasions. At Santa Maria Maggiore unveils a liturgical legacy that traverses centuries. This enduring practice conveys a continuum of faith, symbolizing the basilica's role as a conduit between historical eras. The original architecture of Santa Maria Maggiore was classical and traditionally Roman, perhaps to convey the idea that Santa Maria Maggiore represented old imperial Rome as well as its Christian future. As one scholar puts it, Santa Maria Maggiore so closely resembles a 2nd century imperial basilica that it has sometimes been thought to have been adapted from a basilica for use as a Christian church. Its plan was based on Hellenistic principles stated by Vitruvius at the time of Augustus. The church retains the core of its original structure, despite several additional construction projects and damage by the earthquake of 1348. Church building in Rome in this period, as exemplified in Santa Maria Maggiore, was inspired by the idea of Rome being not just the center of the world of the Roman Empire, as it was seen in the classical period, but the center of the Christian world. This basilica, one of the earliest dedicated to the Virgin Mary, was built shortly after the Council of Ephesus in 431, which declared Mary as the Mother of God. Pope Sixtus III commissioned its construction to commemorate this significant decision. The ambience of the council influenced the creation of the mosaics adorning the interior of the basilica. These mosaics are considered important in the depiction of the Virgin Mary, showcasing scenes from her life and that of Christ, as well as events from the Old Testament, such as Moses parting the Red Sea. The splendor of Santa Maria Maggiore is also attributed to the substantial income the papacy received from landholdings acquired by the Catholic Church in the 4th and 5th centuries on the Italian peninsula. These revenues were managed efficiently, with a portion allocated to church administration, clergy support, building maintenance, and charity. This financial stability allowed the papacy to embark on an ambitious building program that included the construction of Santa Maria Maggiore. Scholar Miri Rubin believes that the building of the basilica was influenced also by seeing Mary as one who could represent the imperial ideals of classical Rome, bringing together the old Rome and the new Christian Rome. In Rome, the city of martyrs, if no longer of emperors, Mary was a figure that could credibly carry imperial memories and representations. Even though Santa Maria Maggiore is immense in its area, it was built to plan. The design of the basilica was a typical one during this time in Rome, a tall and wide nave, an aisle on either side, and a semicircular apse at the end of the nave. The key aspect that made Santa Maria Maggiore such a significant cornerstone in church building during the early 5th century were the beautiful mosaics found on the triumphal arch and nave, which still remain to this day. The Athenian marble columns supporting the nave are even older and either come from the first basilica or from another antique Roman building. 36 are marble and 4 granite, pared down or shortened to make them identical by Ferdinando Fuga, who provided them with identical gilt bronze capitals. Architecturally, Santa Maria Maggiore exemplifies the essence of Romanesque and Baroque architectural styles. Its facade is a quintessential example of Romanesque design, characterized by its use of round arches, intricate carvings, and a sense of solidity. The basilica's nave is adorned with elaborate coffered ceilings and mosaic-clad walls, which are quintessential features of Baroque design. These mosaics, featuring scenes from the Bible and the life of the Virgin Mary, demonstrate an extraordinary level of craftsmanship and attention to detail. In 1743, Pope Benedict XIV commissioned the construction of a new facade which did not damage the mosaics of the original facade inside. In front of the church stands a Corinthian column topped by the Virgin Mary and the child Jesus, erected in 1614. The column itself was the sole surviving column from the Basilica of Maxentius and Constantine. The mosaics found in the basilica are one of the oldest representations of the Virgin Mary in late antiquity, with the 5th century mosaics on the triumphal arch depicting different scenes of Christ and the Virgin Mary.